Let me get my wide angle.
Tell us when you're ready. Tell us when you're ready.
I'm ready.
We need a truck.
Okay, go ahead. Let's go.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Paul Waite with Zern Industries,
And Richard Dale with Irrigator Tech.
and we're here at the Zern Wilkins facility in Paso Robles, California, after another great opportunity to train a bunch of Irrigator Tech contractors.
We had a lot of great people here. We had about 18, 20 people. Everybody came up, had a great time. They learned a lot. It'll make a huge improvement on their business. And now they have a great relationship with Wilkins. We went through the factory. They met some awesome people. And we're super excited about it. And all of our Irrigator Tech members are very, very excited about it. So you guys got to come out to our next Wilkins trip. Come visit. Call us up at Irrigator Tech. Say you want to come to Wilkins and learn a lot and improve your business. And we're ready to do it at any time.
And we take care of you when you come. So all you need to do is bring your body up here, and we cover everything after that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Degree of hazard, we hit a little bit. When we talk about a low hazard, we're talking about a non-health hazard, and that is a pollutant. That is something in the water, it doesn't smell too good, it doesn't look too good, but quite frankly, it will not make us ill or it won't kill us. That's just a low level of hazard, a non-health hazard, again, a pollutant. High hazard, on the other hand, that's something in the water that's going to make us sick or kill us. And that is referred to as a health hazard. So when we have these training courses, I always love to pick on my representative, and it happens to be John Krupke in this case. He gets to be the butt of my jokes for the day. But I tell people to kind of get this into your mind. How do you distinguish between the two? We all sit and listen to this for about an hour, and all of you guys think to yourself, we've heard enough of John Everett, let's go do something fun. We don't want to hear backflow anymore. So we decide as a group, we're going to go out to Lake Nacimiento and do some fishing. Now, when we get out to Lake Nacimiento, Mr. Krupke, while he ties his lures on, he's really big into knots. You know, he ties these fancy knots, but he likes to smoke a cigar. So he puffs on that cigar and he gets his lure on there, and he finally about ready to cast in the water. And he's done with his cigar, and he starts to pitch it up on the bank, and he thinks, whoa, wait a minute, summertime, Paso Robles, I'm gonna burn this place down. So he throws the cigar butt out into the water to extinguish it. Mr. Krupke just polluted the lake. He impaired the quality of the water such that if I take a glass, it's going to smell like cigar ashes, it's not going to be too tasty, but bottom line is it's not going to kill me. And it's probably not going to make me sick. So that is just a pollutant. Now, as we're fishing in this lake, there's a lot of grass and milfoil growing out there. And about every third cast, Mr. Krupke loses a lure. Snap, off it comes. He gets madder than hell and decides he's going to fix this lake once and for all. So he goes to the truck and he grabs a 5-gallon bucket of biocide and he dumps that in the lake because he's going to kill that grass forever. He just contaminated Lake Nacimiento. Now if we take a glass of it, down we go. That's the difference. Pollution is a low level of hazard and it's not aesthetically pleasing. Contamination is a high hazard. Skull and crossbones, we're going to go down if we drink it. So that's why we have to ask about the level of hazard. Double checks. Other valves, they only work for low. RPs work for high. So again, that's why we're asking these questions.
So I have a quick question.
Go.
Why don't you just do RP on everything? Why do you?
Yeah,
That is I love this.
yeah. Always wanted that.
When I get dubbed king forever of the world, everybody's going to use an RP, and that's all there is to it. But unfortunately, I'm not king yet. It boils down to economics and the level of hazard. If a person's only going to deal with a back siphonage condition, never back pressure, and it's a low hazard, they can use an atmospheric vacuum breaker or a pressure vacuum breaker that are a fraction of the cost of an RP. But I agree with you. The level of hazard can and will change. Again, I throw out this hypothetical. We all decide we don't like backflow anymore. We're going to go into a different business. So we decide amongst all of us, a donut shop. Okay, what's in a donut shop? Sugar, flour, water, grease, nothing hazardous in there. We put a double check out at the curb. Now in 6 months of not making any money because Krispy Kreme down the street makes all the money selling donuts, we all decide we made a big mistake. We should go into photo processing. Now think about that. You got heavy, nobody, silly. Anyway, the point is there's heavy duty chemicals in there. It's going to make us sick and hurt us. Oh, but John forgot. He's only got a double check out at the curb and I really need an RP. So if we all put in RPs to begin with, it doesn't matter. We're covered. But I know that it makes people mad when you tell them, well, you need to put in that RP. And it's like, yeah, right, John. It's only back siphonage. and it's only going to be flowing 6 hours out of the day, I could use a little ABB instead. Economics, that's what it was. Very good question.
Well, plus the RP, when it dumps a lot of water. So I mean, in some cases, it's not really the best application. Like when you're inside, and if a double check would work, I'd rather have a double check in there.
Very good point. We have a valve such as an RP. It has a relief valve on it. It can and will discharge water. So if we put it inside the building, now we have to have drainage provisions. So the complexity of the installation grows. Again, if the level of hazard isn't there, we really don't need it. Until I become king of the world. So when we look at the degrees of hazard, discolored water, what it can be? It can be either low or high. It smells bad, same thing, it can be low or high hazard. Tastes bad, yeah. Sulfur water doesn't taste very good, but it's not bad for you. So just because it doesn't taste good doesn't mean it's bad. But when we get down to this line, can it cause illness? A low hazard, no. Can it cause death? No. Low hazards cannot cause illness and death, only high. There's one other level of hazard that we should be cognizant of, and that is a lethal hazard. There are two things, step back. I can mount this in line, and downstream with that water, I can mix anything that you guys can think of with that water. Gasoline, diesel, hexavalent chromium, anything that you can think of, except for two things. I cannot have radioactivity or raw sewage downstream of this valve. Those are construed as lethal hazards, and you must use an air gap. But other than that, any chemical in the world you guys can think of, I can mix with the water downstream, and this valve will prevent that fluid from flowing back into the potable supply. So, when we're talking about raw sewage and radioactivity, again, that's referred to as a lethal hazard. We just call it radioactive poop.
That's it.
If you've got radioactive poop downstream, you cannot use an RP. But other than that, the RP would be for the high hazard application. So moving on here. We talk about the type of application. I think where this is important is to just understand that not all backflow preventers can be pressurized 24/7, 365. Some of them can. And when you look at the various applications, think about something like a hospital. Here's a valve, it's flowing virtually 24/7, 365. All the time water's flowing through that valve. Irrigation valves. You want a valve that's suitable to sit about 98% of the time and only flow 2% of the time. Also, let's go even farther, fire protection. How many times does a backflow preventer in a fire protection system flow? Only has to do it once. That's it. Most of the time, it's going to just sit there. It's probably, the odds are great that that backflow preventer will never meet its rated flow ever in its lifetime sitting there. So you want to make sure you've got a backflow preventer that's capable of taking that static condition all the time. That's all we're trying to say here, is be cognizant of those issues also. These are just a few things that are important. Indoor installations, pit installations, we have to be very careful about those. Once again, a reduced pressure principle assembly can discharge water. If I put this down in a pit and it starts discharging, it can literally suck in what it just expelled. So if I'm going to put it in a vault, and if it's allowed by the authority having jurisdiction, I better have drainage provisions in that vault. I may need a pump, may have drainage lines, whatever it may be, but I've got to be cognizant of that occurring. So that's what we're trying to say here. When we talk about a vertical installation, you cannot freely take a horizontally approved valve and say, I'm going to just mount it in the vertical. Unless these valves are tested and approved in a given orientation, you can't do that. Very, very strict with backflow. A regulator. You can mount this valve this way, this way, this way. It doesn't make any difference. This valve, if it's tested and approved in this position, that is exactly how it must be mounted in the pipeline. So we have to be very careful about that. Make sure that the valve is approved for the type of installation. Accessibility is important too. All backflow preventers must be tested, inspected, and cleaned on an annual basis. We don't want to put them in some location where they can't have that done. If we do that, it doesn't get done. And again, this is not a toilet. This is not a faucet. This is a life safety product. This saves lives, just like fire sprinkler heads do. So we need to have it tested, inspected, and cleaned on an annual basis to make sure that it's working correctly. And if your local codes say so, you may have to test it, clean it, and inspect it more than annually. Just depends on the authority having jurisdiction, but generally speaking, annually. So accessibility, leave room around it. Make sure that the tester can get in there and test the valve and work on it if he needs to. When we talk about devices versus assemblies, start with like a dual check. This dual check, this is a model 700 XL. It has 2 check valves in series internally. This will protect against backflow, but this is a backflow device. A device has no shut-off valves. A device has no test cocks. There's no means for us to determine that this valve is working correctly when it's installed in the line. All we do is put it in the line, and we have to have the intrinsic faith that those check valves, one or both, are going to hold tight and prevent reverse flow. But should they fail, we turn it into a fancy piece of pipe. We have no way of testing that valve. Again, that's a device. An assembly has shut-off valves for the isolation, testing, and maintenance, and it has 4 appropriately located test cocks to test the valve. When we mount this valve in line, we can take our test equipment and test it and make sure that it's functioning correctly. So, building on that, you will not use devices typically in a high hazard application. A device is always used in a low hazard application. High hazard, we have to have an assembly. Now we also have here, this is a style of vacuum breaker. This particular, it's a pressure vacuum breaker. It's good for back siphonage only, no back pressure. But again, it's still an assembly. I have my shut-off valves and I have test cocks so that I can test it and make sure that it's functioning correctly and will prevent backflow. So that's the difference between a device and an assembly. Think of devices as low hazard, more point of use. Assemblies are going to be higher hazard, and they're typically going to be out of the curb for containment. Do we know the difference between the two? If I'm isolating a process within my facility to keep that process from intermixing with the rest of my water, that's referred to as isolation. I'm isolating that one process away from everything else. My backflow preventer out of the curb is referred to as a containment backflow preventer. It's containing every bit of this water away from the potable supply. So typically, a device will be used for isolation, an assembly will be used for containment. Any questions on that?
Is that similar to internal protection and system protection?
Exactly, exactly. Internal isolation, system containment. Okay, so let's take a look at types of backflow preventer devices. Post-connection vacuum breakers, the dual check. Here's your post-connection vacuum breaker. Every hose bib in the state of California has one on it. Again, those are devices. Dual check with atmospheric vent, and finally the atmospheric vacuum breaker. Starting with the hose connection vacuum breaker, you can see it's good for back siphonage only, no back pressure. It cannot be placed under a continuous pressure condition. Vacuum breakers, unless they're of the pressure variety, can only be pressurized 12 hours out of a 24-hour period. You must give them that 12-hour rest period. And that's so that the seals don't adhere to the seat internally and then turn the thing into a fancy piece of pipe. They're not, again, not made for continuous. They're good for low hazard. They are not good for high hazard. That's starting just with the hose connection vacuum breaker. Looking at the dual check, it'll protect against both backflow conditions, back pressure and back siphonage. It is made for continuous pressure, but again, we have no way to test it. We don't know if it's working correctly, so it's only going to be a low hazard valve, not a high hazard. We look at a dual check with atmospheric vent. This valve acts somewhat like a baby RP. You have your 2 check valves in series, and in between them, we have a little relief valve. In the event you have a backflow condition and your second check fails, polluted water would flow out of the vent to a safe drain. But it does